And hello YouTube, hello everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Doctor Who Fridays. And joining me is CoquiPirate, who has literally just finished watching for the first time ever the first ever Daleks. And so, Coqui, what did you think?
They were able to subdue a Dalek barehanded, is what I think. This is not the Daleks I'm familiar with. It was an interesting change of pace, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything's more primitive in every sense, and I think kids in 1963 were a bit more easily scared, and the plot kind of had to be served by there had to be a way of escaping, and there had to be, just as you have to kind of accept the budget. I don't know if you noticed, but they actually only had 4 Daleks. And then they've got some blow-ups in the background. I don't know if you noticed that. A lot hadn't been decided upon, and these 7 episodes, the writer Terry Nation, as far as he was concerned, this was all you were ever going to see of Daleks, and it probably will be forgotten. It would just be that 7-week thing, but obviously they took off, and the next time you see them, of course, they're an invasionary force. But you still have that to come. But yeah, these Daleks, they can't leave the city, and they don't have anything like the kind of power. But the way it's explained in Doctor Who lore, that I'm aware of at least, is that, that seclusion, they're kind of in a rut, and they fall into entropy. They've kind of de-evolved, and other Daleks that are more advanced are out there conquering galaxies and having empires and what have you.
I see. If I had to ask another question about the Daleks specifically, why did they have beds?
Maybe a remnant of when they had been humanoid. That's kind of a spoiler, but you might have guessed that they had.
Oh yeah, no, they suggested that already. The Daleks.
Oh yeah, they did.
They were thinkers and philosophers, and
exactly.
They somehow evolved into the Daleks.
Yeah, it's weird. The radiation affected one race one way and the other race another, at least in this version. But as we discussed a little bit earlier, the Dalek backstory, there's a lot more to be added that needs to be... Well, actually, you must know this, because obviously you have seen Davros, who wasn't mentioned in this serial. So, yeah, there's stuff, as with anything in early Doctor Who, there's stuff that hasn't been decided upon yet, just as there's stuff like, the fluid link must contain mercury, or the TARDIS won't go, is never mentioned again, So
it's like the Doctor's smoking habit.
Yeah. This is still very seminal stuff. We're still in the original commissioned 18 episodes, which had to be successful, had to get viewing figures. It's actually the Daleks that took them from a rather abysmal 2 or 3 million viewers. Which, bearing in mind, episode 1 of Doctor Who, I mean, not of the Daleks. So the very first episode we saw last week coincided with Kennedy's death, the Kennedy assassination, and so everybody was watching the news. So they were kind of cursed there, and then for a few weeks it looked like Doctor Who was going to get axed, and then Daleks got them 10 million views, and it's oh, okay, we have a thing here, and obviously next season more Daleks. So Doctor Who historians always kind of speculate that if Daleks hadn't been brought in, and hadn't been brought in when they did, that would have been it. So basically, the 7 episodes we just watched, if they hadn't been made, if they'd done something else or whatever, Doctor Who would just have been 18 episodes in 1963. You'd never have heard of it. I might never have heard of it. It wouldn't be the thing it is today. Those 7 episodes are, in a sense, the most important, because that's what saves Doctor Who from the chopping block.
Okay. And Yeah, I guess, this kind of goes into what you, James, said last week in that it played on a lot of fears. The whole radiation thing at the end. And
Yeah.
there's some pretty clear Nazi imagery, which I guess is another sort of fear present in the public mind back then. The plunger Nazi salute. I guess they're trying to be ironic, but they sort of communicate a weird message in the process, in that the Daleks that see themselves as a race that ought to survive and view the other race as being sort of these mutant, evolved creatures. What are they? They are the Aryan race. They're all blonde. They're all white. And so, while they're trying to be ironic, at the same time, they're still being a little racist, but okay.
They do kind of describe the Thals as, Susan just says, judging by Alidon, they're a magnificent people. And we're meant to view these tall, blonde, James actually said Herculean god, as some kind of like, they're not the mutants, they're the perfect human people. I don't know what the actual thinking was for them to all be tall and blonde. They're supposed to be a tall race anyway.
Well, it's a play on the Nazis. So, in this case, the desired races, what we deemed the desired race are the freakish mutants. And these hideous creatures that we don't really see, besides the claw, they are, the master race, apparently. Not to be confused with the master race, which appears in the new Clue. That was an interesting concept. But yeah, and on racism in Doctor Who, something that I didn't bring up last week was the whole, what about the Red Indian when he first saw the steam engine, what went through his savage mind or whatever?
Yeah.
I guess 1960s were 1960s. I asked if Red Indian was an acceptable term. You said political correctness didn't exactly exist back then.
I don't think the term political correctness was even coined until the 90s, maybe 80s. In 1960s Britain, it was perfectly acceptable if you offered accommodation to hang a sign in your window saying no coloureds or no Irish, no N-words. That people didn't bat an eyelid. A lot of the comedy of the 60s and 70s in the UK. Eventually there was a backlash that came in the 80s of alternative comedy. So you could see some British TV from as recently as the 70s, and it would be shockingly racist. And I think there is more stuff in Doctor Who that is at least iffy or questionable. Although, to be honest, the actual dialogue of the Daleks does condemn racism. Ian Chesterton says, as irrational as it is, a dislike of the unlike, you can't reason with people like that. So he is condemning racism. It's just that, but with it, the actual execution of the show from over 50 years ago, kind of, I think, just takes a lot of things for granted that are in the public consciousness of what normal is. And with a certain naivety as well, because as you pointed out, that amount of evolution in a few centuries. I think later they say that the Thal versus Khaled war, except here they're called Dals. Later, I think they say that the Thal versus Khaled war was 1,000 years. Oh, but of course this is supposed to be centuries after the war, but they were already mutating and trying to fight the mutations before the final end of the war. Talking of radiation, I want to say one thing. You questioned them having beds in the cell. You don't see any door to an adjacent bathroom either. And if you actually did have radiation sickness, you would be vomiting and you'd have diarrhea. So that would not be a pleasant cell to be in.
Wow. Yes, you're right. There was no bathroom or any. Wow. Yeah.
But then, never mind. Why would Daleks have beds? Why would Daleks have toilets? Because I'm thinking, does the crab creature jump out and do its business, or do they just sort of... Is there like a little hole that opens up?
Yeah, I'd imagine that they extract it directly and maybe try to use it as fuel or something. Not let any of it go to waste.
That makes sense, because it's a very self-contained kind of cult, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, kind of setup they've got. But yeah, and of course, another thing is that these Daleks aren't integrated cyborgs. They are little... I don't know quite from what we see if they're meant to be frogs or...
We just see a claw.
Yeah, there's something to me that looks amphibian or reptilian, but they're like these little creatures, and they're operating controls. So a human can get into a casing and pass themselves off as a Dalek, which obviously, if you look at the new series, it's very kind of... Clearly, there's a grey area as to where the organic ends and the machine begins, more of an integrated type of cyborg. But obviously, I think what they were going for, because a lot of it's World War II influenced, the World War II movie influenced. It's the classic trick the guards to come into the cell, overpower him, steal his uniform. One of you pretends to be a guard, taking you for questioning. It's actually one of those tropes or cliches, but we hadn't seen it in science fiction before. But Doctor Who obviously is a very kind of post-war type of show, and can't actually name anything where someone knocks out the Nazi guard and steals his uniform. But you know what I'm saying. It's definitely a thing.
Yeah, I noticed that I pointed this out in the prior arc as well, but this one, automatic doors, they're credited to Star Trek. They appeared in Doctor Who first. I think that's noteworthy. Yeah, they had Nazi imagery, the whole hyper-nationalism thing. A bit of James Bond villain syndrome, because they were so quick to kill the Thralls, or whatever the other race was called. I forget. The Thralls. Okay. But with Doctor and Susan, it's like, oh, let's hold them prisoner. Because we need someone to just mess everything up, apparently. But, yeah. Hell yeah. And the automatic doors were cool.
And I would now also like to introduce another guest from last week, you, James.
You know what I'm going to say, so is there any point in me even saying it?
Well, basically, Coqui has literally just seen the Daleks for the first time, his first ever viewing of the first ever Daleks. Would you like to... It's not long since the last time you saw that serial, is it, James? Do you want to tell us your view of it, or ask Coqui a question, or...
Yes, basically, as I've discussed previously in private Skype conversations, the Daleks, not just in this serial, but Terry Nation's entire concept was an amalgamation of two fears which really summed up that time period, 1963-1964. The fear of nationalistic, puritanical genocide, one race declaring itself to be superior and then setting out to annihilate all others, and also nuclear war. Terry Nation didn't just choose radiation by accident. A planet utterly decimated by nuclear fallout, except for the plains where the Thals have survived as farmers for centuries. That was the great fear of the Cold War. Everyone from before we were born, Alex, was basically just walking around with the constant fear of, yes, at any second somebody in Washington or Moscow is going to press the red button and we will all be vaporized.
Why make it red? That just makes you want to push it. Red is just
yes, the classic sketch from Father Ted, Dougal staring at the button in the plane cockpit. Do not push. Do not. That's just an invitation.
yeah. But it clearly played on a lot of the fears. The era shows in a lot of other ways. I mean, I guess this also ties back to the last serial. You know, it's the consistent theme, the gender role thing. I'm sorry, what's the professor's name? Chessmeister?
Chesterton.
Chesterton.
You're as bad as the Doctor.
Yeah, that's one of his jokes throughout the serial, as you'll come to discover. The Doctor never gets Chesterton's name right.
Okay, well,
I point out, Coqui, they kind of borrow that for the new series. If you remember, the 9th Doctor always called Mickey Ricky.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they kept that character trait. But sorry, carry on.
Okay, Chesterton. Well, no, just you kind of see the gender roles. Chesterton, he's always trying to be dynamic, figure out solutions to things. Whereas when the female characters discover things, more often than not, it's by accident. You know, like I'm thinking about the female professor. I don't even have the.
Barbara Wright.
Barbara Wright, yes. You know, she's just sort of padding around, and then she just happens to hit the little sensor that makes the door open, which for the time is a pretty cool idea. You know, that it can detect you and open. But yeah, you kind of see this kind of. Oh, Susan, you know, I've mentioned this before. She just comes off as like this hysterical crybaby type character, which sometimes it seems justified, but sometimes, you know, it seems a little too persistent a theme. Like when she's running through the whole forest when everyone else is coming off as so cool, and, you know, this is a forest that she just went through, and she's like running, crying, yeah, you know.
Because she's dying of radiation poisoning. B, she knows that her companions are dying of radiation poisoning, and C, she just felt something brush past her.
Well, she's also on her own, which she wasn't before, and she's been told that there are mutants out there.
Okay.
So there's something in the dark.
It's something I saw in the last arc too. I guess that's just an aspect of her character. You know, she's very expressive when she's afraid.
Just to give some context, though, remembering we are talking about more than 50 years ago, I've recently watched a couple of episodes of the original series of Star Trek, and remembering people's dismissal of Susan, Barbara, other female characters in early classic Doctor Who. Oh, they were just screaming and waiting for the Doctor to save them and blah, blah, blah. Well, it's better than the female crewmen in Star Trek, who are literally the secretaries. Beginning of one episode, the yeoman, I think is the rank, just crewman in the little mini skirt and tights, blonde hair and a ponytail, giving the male officers coffee.
So you kind of see that in the end of this episode with the females of the Foul Tribe. But yeah, you're right. At least we have some characters that are much more dynamic than a lot of the roles.
Yes. Wait until you get to the Daleks' master plan. That's a treat, which I'm not going to spoil, but in terms of gender roles, oh yes.
Yes, the shocking reveal.
Yeah.
Can I just briefly pop back to the issue of the fears of the time, point out the Cuban Missile Crisis was only the previous year.
Exactly, that was something that had only just occurred to me as you mentioned it, Alex. Yes, but
So, in terms of story, obviously this is a lot. This was for 7 episodes. This was, longer than anything that we'd see in Doctor Who nowadays, and it's not even the longest classic Who. I'd say watching it all in one go, it stands up. As an adventure film.
Yeah.
It takes maybe a while getting to the big action with the journey and the fight. A lot of character stuff. And yes, it's very dated in how it's done, but like with the previous one, I felt immersed. I've always believed in Skaro as a world. From a storytelling point of view, I'll go alphabetically. What did you think specifically about the approach to storytelling, the way that it unfolded, Coqui?
Well, I liked, all of this is very entertaining. My little nitpicks and jabs, just because that's the kind of person I am. But, I liked how they throw you into this new world. They have, like, the little metallic creature to sort of point out. Because, we imagine aliens, but this is something so alien. It's something that we wouldn't imagine as life. You have the Dalek character, which, this whole sort of hyper-nationalistic thing. I feel as though they were trying to explore the opposite extreme with the Thals, who were incredibly pacifistic, and, kind of say that that's also a bad idea. Or at least, something that they had to overcome. So, it had a lot of themes, even though, like I poke at some tropes, like the whole, not gonna kill you just now, going to, like, hold you prisoner, and, that kind of thing. But all in all, I thoroughly enjoyed this arc.
Cool. I will throw in there, this is a thought that occurred to me the other day in preparation for this. Doctor Who in those days was in a big universe. The Doctor doesn't seem to have prior knowledge of this planet. It's a complete mystery. It seems very remote. You don't know when you are. It comes across that the Daleks and the Thals don't have a concept of, or at least have never actually encountered space travel. It's this whole new mystery to be uncovered. This is one of the reasons I think why it's my one of the reasons I love early Doctor Who. They've never quite got back to the big universe in that way, to some extent with the Tom Baker era, and also just one of the reasons why it's my one of my favourite Dalek stories of all time. And James.
Yes, regarding the tropes and the cliches, etc., the convenient plot points, the Doctor conveniently sabotaging the TARDIS because he wants to investigate the city, escaping, but then the part that it was working, but they do actually need it, is back in the Dalek city, conveniently taking the Doctor and Susan prisoner rather than killing them purely so that they can escape and save the Thals and destroy the Daleks. It's that is just what happens in television and in movies. I can't remember I can't count the number of times I have screamed, "Just push the button! Push it! Now, if you push it now, they will be dead. Everything will be solved. No, they have to delay until they get captured."
I think the wording I used at that scene, and Alex could vouch for me, is something like, "Regeneration isn't canon yet. He won't come back if you kill him now."
But Alex and I have discussed this, though. The one scene in the Daleks which truly stands out for me is what I regard as the Thal's suicide, Alex regards as heroic self-sacrifice.
That character was a coward. I mean, his death did allow them to win, but I don't think he had a heroic mentality about it.
No, he committed suicide, in my opinion, because he was so terrified of being killed by the Daleks, he would rather fall to his death. Like many people on death row commit suicide, they would rather kill themselves than be executed. Or go through the fear of the constant stress of waiting to be executed.
And to go back to the point, of course, that this was the first ever Dalek story, Coqui, obviously you're familiar with the new Daleks, and you did remark, these are very different to the Daleks that you know. It being the introductory story, obviously they build up the suspense. It's a whole 20-something minute episode before you see so much as one Dalek arm. Then there's the Dalek reveal. I think their first ever line is, "You will move ahead of us and follow my directions." And is it in any way what you expected, if you know what you expected, or were there any major kind of immediate surprises that this is how Daleks were first seen? And of course, that it did scare people, and it was accountable for the longevity and success of the show.
How they were introduced, I don't know. I guess it was. I was kind of expecting them to just kill, because that's how the Daleks have been in the new series, in the new season, or rather, in New Who as a whole. But I guess it didn't strike. I just sort of accept. Okay, the Daleks are taking prisoners, and I went along with that. That they needed medicine, also a little different, but in terms of how they're introduced, it certainly does sort of give you this, I guess, totalitarian feel to it. Because, if you want to show people as totalitarian, you almost always involve the military and prisons, which they found a way to sort of merge them both here. So, yeah, it has an atmosphere. Actually, an atmosphere that I don't think is quite captured in New Who, even though conceptually they're very similar. So, yeah, I guess it had a much more sort of Nazi-esque feel, as opposed to, the sort of destroy everything feel of modern Daleks.
When I did my YouTube review of this serial, I mainly did focus on the feel, the atmosphere, the ambience, which is, something that it's a sad loss. Even classic Who often didn't capture the kind of the mystery and feel of something like this serial. James, anything to add?
Yes, I would point out that the first time I saw the Daleks in New Doctor Who, I thought, these aren't the Daleks. These are just bog standard insert enemies here, which just happen to look like Daleks. As we've discussed, the Daleks were created by Terry Nation to fit as a representative of as the personification of a very specific fear. The fear of genocide, the fear of nuclear war, the fear of the Nazis, which was still there in living memory. You can just imagine the director talking to Hartnell before shooting. Basically, think of these as Nazis in tin suits. And Hartnell would have known, having fought in the war himself, he would have known exactly. These aren't. Don't think of them as machines. Don't think of them as cyborgs. These are SS in tin suits. And that is the feel that you that is the feeling that you have throughout the serial. So yes, my biggest problem. I don't know if anyone actually asked the question or if it was just something that came up in discussion. Why aren't the Daleks scary anymore? Because they don't represent anything anymore. It was a discussion with Dr. Smith, if I remember, in another Skype call. And I think it was an episode of London After Midnight, also available on Alex Wiley's channel. Please subscribe. Yes. Why aren't the Daleks scary anymore? Because monsters aren't just about looking scary or doing scary things. It's that they are personifications of our deepest subconscious fears. So I don't think the Daleks can ever be scary again, because they were created to represent a fear which no longer, as the personification of a fear which no longer exists. So in a way, what was it Moffat said regarding the Weeping Angels and the Basharada? Monsters are never as good the second time you show them. Then went on to write 2 more Weeping Angel stories. Pillar. But I think the same thing applies to the Daleks. That, yes, as much as I love serials such as The Daleks' Master Plan, it never had the same kind of feel to it, as you say. They did just become the standard insert baddie here, along with the Cybermen. But, another point that I wanted to discuss before the recording break. Something that struck me the first time I saw this serial last year, and I don't think it's just down to ethnocentrism and the latent racism which is there in all 1960s television. The fact that the Thals are Aryan supermen.
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit before you arrived.
But I honestly believe that Terry Nation and the director of the series deliberately cast Aryan supermen to show, because normally you'd expect because of the war, because of the Nazi threat, you'd expect the Aryan supermen to be the genocidal fanatics. But no, this was almost a subliminal message to the British people. No, you don't have to be scared of Germans. No, you don't have to be scared of bodybuilders with blonde hair and blue eyes. They are not all Nazis. They can be pacifists. Because, yes, that fear of the Aryan Ubermensch would have still existed around that time, just as the fear of the Cuban Missile Crisis would still be right there.
Of course, they do write that the Thals were once the warriors and the Daleks had been philosophers.
Yes, and again, that to me was a masterfully subtle piece of metaphor by Terry Nation, a subtle subliminal message that, yes, we were at war with these people, the Germans, but they can be peaceful. So there is, just because they were once warriors obsessed with bloodshed, etc., and conquest, does not mean that they will always be so. They are simply pacifists who want peace. And where did the Daleks get fountain pens? When writing Susan being forced to write the note to the Thal leader.
Yeah, we talked a bit about that. Coqui remarks on how it takes one Dalek to pick up the board and another Dalek to read it. How efficient is that?
Again, the Daleks were designed for to prey upon our innermost fears, not for efficiency.
Yeah, and of course we are in the future, looking at something that is meant to be futuristic or technologically futuristic, when of course they had no idea what they were doing back in '63. So it's very kind of trying to recreate something that looks advanced for us when you're, as we discussed before, even the editing of that show was primitive to Stone Age compared to.
I know. I realise that just reminds me of something. I realised that Enterprise doesn't exist. Star Trek Enterprise. The only good two-parter, as far as I'm concerned, was the alternate universe two-parter with showing this Enterprise as part of the Terran Empire rather than the Federation. If you go back to the original series and some of Deep Space, unfortunately, some of the less good episodes of Deep Space Nine. So the idea being that all of Enterprise was just a fan-wanking crossover, desperately trying to tie together all of the plot threads from the original series, and so on and so forth. It was such a fucking mess. But the idea was that there was an episode of the original series, The Tholian Web, and so on and so forth. But basically, a ship from Kirk's time in the Federation universe, the good universe, gets transported back 100 years to Commander Archer in the Terran Empire universe. So, this ship, the Defiant, has such vastly superior technology. So, it's the crew of the Enterprise made in the 2000s, and in awe of the superior technology of a ship that was designed to match the original series from the 1960s. So they've got the tape decks and the scanner that Spock used to look into, and all of the flashing lights. Oh, such advanced technology you have got to be.
This reminds me of Battlestar Galactica, how they retconned it, saying that all of the phones had wires because they were afraid that the Cylons would interfere, via wireless networks.
Yes. It's not just that there was no such thing as wireless telephones in the 90s. There are plot holes. Accept them. There are continuity errors. Oh, for God's sake, the Klingons in...
Yes, I was just thinking of that.
Yeah, but that's the point. The Trills, but the point I was going to make is, the Trills in Star Trek The Next Generation, they're only introduced in one episode, look completely different from the Trills in Deep Space Nine. Nobody gives a toss. They didn't devote an entire 2-part episode of Enterprise to trying to fix that little plot hole.
Yeah.
Get over it!
Something that came up a little bit before we were recording is that there are 2 backstories for the Daleks on Skaro, and you have to listen to the audio drama I, Davros, which kind of ties them together. They've got reference to Dals as being like an ancient version of the Khaleds, and you can kind of explain it. Well, at the time, of course, they didn't know that things were going to be repeated. They didn't know people were going to buy VHS, because it wasn't a thing yet to have VHS at home. So you'd had, say, 1974, 1975, you had over a decade to forget the original Dalek story by the time you saw Genesis of the Daleks. Yeah. So some people might have gone, is this what they said the backstory of the Daleks was? But basically... And you'd have people who would be too young to remember. It didn't really matter. Television was a very ephemeral thing. You didn't think, one day people will have rooms full of DVDs as their treasured collection.
And they never predicted the rise of the obsessive fanboy. Oh, God, the thing that makes science fiction writers quake in their boots.
But humans need something to argue about over the internet, so it's a service, really.
Yes, if they're arguing over that, then at least they're not causing any actual harm. Is the Doctor half human?
Okay, well, thank you for joining me, and thanks to anybody listening, and hope you've enjoyed the second episode as much as I have, and looking forward to next week when we will be discussing the 2-part serial Edge of Destruction, which, if I recall correctly, would have been the last Doctor Who story, had the show not been rescued from the axe. And hopefully next week we will have Jen, who has sadly not been able to join us for the past 2 shows. So, Coqui, do you have any closing thoughts and goodbyes?
Just prepare to be exterminated. Have a good one.
And James?
Why can new Doctor Who never be this good? Because the world has changed, unfortunately. I've said this so often, I'm just repeating myself. So I'll just say, may the blessings of the great holy donkey be upon you all.
Ahaha. Okie dokie then. So, right, I have to say it. Next episode, The Edge of Destruction. Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum.